At its peak under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire operated on a remarkably effective mechanism. A vast tax base funded a highly disciplined citizen military. That military, in turn, secured the borders, ensuring the economy continued to thrive. It was a closed, self-sustaining loop of security and wealth. 3.5 centuries later, in 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, lost his throne. But no foreign horde breached the walls of his palace. No apocalyptic battle took place. He was simply told to pack his bags and retire by his own commanding general, a man named Odoacer. Odoacer was not a Roman citizen. He was a Germanic tribal leader who drew his paycheck directly from the Roman state. The transition of 476 AD was a slow, bureaucratic handover. Over hundreds of years, the empire gradually outsourced its own survival to the very people it was trying to keep out. The cracks in the system appeared in the 3rd century. The empire suffered a sequence of compounding disasters. Localized climate changes ruined harvests, pandemics decimated the population, and generals fought endless civil wars over who would sit on the throne. These shocks drained the Roman treasury. With fewer taxpayers surviving the plagues and wars, the state lacked the revenue to maintain its massive professional army. To cut costs, emperors stopped paying to maintain remote frontier forts. Instead, they moved their troops inward, billeting them inside civilian cities. Living among civilians, these soldiers spent less time drilling and more time extorting the local townsfolk. Simultaneously, their commanders began skimming from the payrolls, eroding discipline at every level. As the military became an expensive liability, the Roman elite shielded themselves. Wealthy senatorial aristocrats used legal loopholes to avoid paying their taxes, and they refused to supply their peasant laborers as military recruits. By the late 4th century, military standards had eroded to the point of official petition. Soldiers actually requested permission to stop wearing their standard-issue metal helmets and thick armor, claiming the gear was too heavy. Without that protection, they were easily cut down by enemy archers. Tax evasion at the top and a refusal to train at the bottom hollowed out the military. The state was functionally defenseless before the most significant barbarian migrations even began. That migration arrived in 376 AD. Hundreds of thousands of Goths, fleeing across the steppe to escape the advancing Huns, crowded onto the banks of the Danube River, begging for asylum inside the Roman Empire. Historically, Rome would break up these incoming groups, resettle them, and draft them into the army as citizens. Instead, corrupt provincial officials starved the refugees, hoarding the state's food supplies and forcing the Goths to sell their own children into slavery for dog meat. Pushed to total starvation, the Goths rebelled. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, they destroyed the Eastern Roman field army and killed the Emperor Valens on the battlefield. This diagram shows how the Roman state reacted to the sudden loss of its soldiers. Instead of rebuilding the traditional pipeline of citizens to legionaries to generals, no ideological loyalty to the idea of Rome, they fought exclusively for the gold and grain the imperial treasury provided. Power followed the swords. The office of Magister Militum, the master of soldiers, became the highest authority in the state. These military strongmen, often of barbarian descent themselves, dictated policy while weak emperors served as figureheads. This dynamic snapped in 410 AD. The Gothic king Alaric marched his federate army to the gates of Rome and sacked the city. He did this because the Roman court refused his demands for back pay and agricultural land for his men. The sack of Rome demonstrated that the imperial court had become a point of negotiation between the barbarian kings and the state's dwindling resources. The emperors were now caught between their hired armies and their own wealth. This map of the Western Empire in the 5th century illustrates the final arrangement. To afford protection, the Roman court ceded massive territories, Gaul, Spain, and North Africa, directly to barbarian armies, paying them in land so they would fight off other invading tribes. When Odoacer deposed the final emperor in 476 AD, the map was already carved up. The emperor possessed no central military force to call upon because the military consisted entirely of the kingdoms surrounding him. These successor states absorbed Roman culture. They kept Roman legal systems, Latin literacy, and administrative practices, establishing themselves as wealthy, independent kings ruling over the remaining Roman populations. Rome's transition suggests that when an empire replaces its own citizens with independent contractors, it eventually surrenders its sovereignty to them. The hired help didn't have to conquer the house, they already held the keys.